What if the woman who treats you like family is secretly trying to destroy you? I never thought I'd find myself sitting in my own car, parked 2 blocks away from my own house, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white just trying to breathe. It was a Tuesday evening, raining just enough to keep the wipers on a slow, rhythmic beat. Through the windshield, everything looked blurry, but inside my head, everything was terrifyingly clear. I was avoiding my own home. More specifically, I was avoiding the woman who was currently in my kitchen baking fresh cinnamon rolls for my husband and daughter. The woman everyone in our town called a saint, my mother-in-law, Eleanor. If you had told me 3 years ago that this incredibly sweet, elegant woman would drive me to the brink of questioning my own sanity, I would have laughed. Back then, I thought I had won the jackpot. My name is Maya, I'm 32, and I work from home as a freelance graphic designer. My husband, David, is an architectural engineer, a good, grounded guy who loves his family more than anything. We live in a quiet coastal town in Oregon, the kind of place where neighbors still wave at you from across the street. We have a 7-year-old daughter named Lily, who is the absolute center of our universe. For the first few years of our marriage, things were wonderful. David and I were a team. We made decisions together, we argued constructively, and we always had each other's backs. His mother, Eleanor, lived a few hours away, so we only saw her on major holidays. She was always polite, a bit reserved, but perfectly pleasant. Everything changed about a year ago when Eleanor's husband passed away. She was suddenly left all alone in a large, empty house. David was devastated for her, and honestly, so was I. She seemed so fragile, so remarkably graceful in her grief. She never complained, never asked for help, which somehow made us want to help her even more. After a few months of watching her struggle from a distance, David and I sat down and had a long talk. We decided to ask her to move in with us. We had a spacious guest suite on the first floor that was barely being used. I remember telling David, she's family and she shouldn't be alone right now. I really believed I was doing the right thing. When Eleanor arrived, she didn't bring any chaos. In fact, she brought an eerie sense of perfection. Within a week, our chaotic, lived-in house transformed into something out of a home decor magazine. Fresh flowers appeared on the dining table every Monday. The pantry was organized by category and expiration date. She took over the cooking, and let me tell you, her food was spectacular. French stews, homemade bread, perfectly balanced salads. At first, I felt like I was living in a luxury resort. I would come down from my home office, exhausted after hours of staring at a screen, and a hot, healthy lunch would be waiting for me on the counter. Eleanor would smile warmly, pat my arm, and say, "You work so hard, Maya. Let me take care of this. You just focus on your beautiful career." It was perfect, too perfect. The first tiny ripple in the water happened about 2 months after she moved in. It was something so insignificant that I dismissed it immediately. I had planned to cook a traditional Sunday roast, a recipe my own grandmother had taught me. It was David's favorite. I went downstairs around 4 o'clock only to find the kitchen spotlessly clean and a massive lasagna already bubbling in the oven. Eleanor was washing a mixing bowl. When she saw me, her hand flew to her chest and her eyes went wide. "Oh, Maya, I am so sorry," she gasped, looking genuinely mortified. "I completely forgot you wanted to cook today. My mind has been so scattered lately. I just wanted to make sure David and Lily had a warm meal ready because I know how busy you've been with your new client. Please don't be angry with me." She looked so small, so deeply apologetic that I felt an instant wave of guilt. "Eleanor, it's fine, really, don't worry about it," I said, putting a hand on her shoulder. When David came home, Eleanor immediately confessed her mistake to him, her voice trembling slightly. "I ruined Maya's plans for dinner, David. I'm just an old, forgetful woman taking up space here." David immediately hugged her. "Mom, stop it. You made lasagna, it's amazing. Maya doesn't mind at all, right, honey?" I smiled and nodded, saying, "Of course not." But later that night, as I lay in bed, I felt a strange, subtle discomfort. She hadn't forgotten. I had reminded her about the roast that very morning while making coffee. I shrugged it off. People forget things, it was no big deal. But then the forgetfulness became a pattern, and the pattern started to shift. It moved away from kitchen duties and began creeping into my relationship with my daughter. Lily loved drawing, a passion we shared. Every Friday after school, we had a ritual. We would sit at the kitchen island, eat apple slices with peanut butter, and paint together. One Friday, I came down at our usual time, but the kitchen was empty. I walked into the living room and found Lily and Eleanor sitting on the carpet. Eleanor had bought a massive, professional-grade watercolor set, far more expensive than anything I usually bought for a 7-year-old, and they were painting a huge canvas together. Lily was glowing with excitement. "Look, Mommy, Grandma bought me the best paints ever. She says I'm a real artist now," Lily yelled, not looking up from her work. Eleanor looked up at me, giving me that same soft, apologetic smile. "I hope you don't mind, Maya." Lily was crying after school because she said she was bored and she asked me to paint with her. I couldn't say no to those sweet eyes. I know Friday is your special time, but she was just so desperate for some attention. I froze. Lily had been crying. Lily had asked her. I looked at my daughter, who was completely absorbed in her painting. "Lily, sweetie, were you sad after school?" I asked gently. Lily shrugged, her mind elsewhere. "I don't know, Grandma said we should paint." I looked back at Eleanor. Her expression hadn't changed, but for a fraction of a second, just a blink of an eye, her warmth felt incredibly cold. Eleanor, we have a routine for Fridays, I said, keeping my voice low and level. Eleanor's eyes instantly welled up with tears. She dropped her paintbrush, her hands shaking. I'm so sorry, Maya. I was just trying to be a good grandmother. I didn't mean to step on your toes. I'll just go to my room. I clearly don't know my place here anymore. She practically fled down the hallway, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the room. 10 minutes later, David walked through the front door. Before he could even take off his coat, Lily ran to him, crying, Mommy made Grandma cry. Grandma's hiding in her room. David's face hardened. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. When he went to Eleanor's room to check on her, I followed him. Through the cracked door, I heard Eleanor sobbing softly, telling David, It's not Maya's fault, David. She's the mother. She has every right to dictate who spends time with her child. I'm just an outsider here. I shouldn't have bought those paints. I just miss your father so much, and Lily brings me so much joy, but I will stay out of the way from now on. David came out of that room looking at me like I was some kind of monster. Maya, she's grieving, he whispered, his voice laced with frustration. She's doing everything for this family, and you're picking fights over a watercolor set? Why are you being so territorial lately? I stood there completely stunned. I hadn't raised my voice, I hadn't scolded her, I had simply stated a fact about our routine. But somehow, within the span of 20 minutes, Eleanor had transformed herself into a heartbroken victim and me into a cruel, ungrateful bully. That was the moment the fog began to clear and I realized something was deeply, dangerously wrong. Over the next 2 months, the atmosphere in our house turned into psychological warfare, but it was a war where only one side was openly fighting while the other played the martyr. Eleanor's perfection became a weapon. She started doing things that seemed incredibly kind on the surface but were systematically designed to undermine me. She began rewashing the clothes I had already washed and folded, whispering to David when she thought I couldn't hear, I just wanted to make sure your work shirts didn't have wrinkles, honey. Maya has so much on her plate she tends to rush through the laundry. She started managing Lily's school schedule. I would open Lily's backpack to sign a permission slip, only to find Eleanor had already signed it as grandmother guardian. When I confronted her about it, she clasped her hands together, looking terrified. Oh, Maya, the deadline was today. I didn't want Lily to miss the field trip because you forgot. I tried to find you, but your office door was closed. I thought I was helping. My office door hadn't been closed all morning. The worst part was what she was doing to David. Every evening before David arrived home, Eleanor would look exhausted. She would sigh heavily, rub her lower back, and move around the kitchen with a slow, painful limp. But the second David walked through the door, she would suddenly put on a brave, heroic smile. Don't worry about me, David. I'm fine, she would say, her voice cracking with forced cheerfulness. Yes, my arthritis is acting up a bit, but I managed to deep clean the kitchen and prep dinner. Maya was so engrossed in her computer today, I didn't want to bother her for help. She needs her rest. David began looking at me with resentment. We stopped talking. Every time I tried to bring up Eleanor's behavior, David would instantly get defensive. She's an old woman, Maya. She's doing our laundry, cooking our meals, and taking care of our kid, and all you do is complain about her tone or her facial expressions. Do you hear yourself? You sound paranoid. You sound jealous. Jealous? That word cut through me like a knife. Was I jealous? I started analyzing every interaction, every conversation. I began staying up late, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I really was the bad guy. Maybe I was just stressed from work. Maybe I was projecting my own insecurities onto this lonely widow who was just trying to be useful. I was losing my grip on reality. I felt entirely isolated in my own home. My husband was slipping away from me, turning into his mother's fierce protector, while my daughter started looking at me like I was the strict, unpleasant parent compared to her fun, gift-giving grandmother. The tension reached its absolute peak on a Saturday in mid-May. It was Eleanor's birthday. I wanted to make a genuine effort to fix things. I told David that I would handle everything. I booked a reservation at an upscale, waterfront restaurant that Eleanor had mentioned wanting to visit. I bought her an elegant silk scarf she had admired in a boutique downtown. I wanted to show David and myself that I could be a good daughter-in-law, that we could be a normal family. The reservation was for 6:30 p.m. At 5:30, I went upstairs to get dressed. I put on a nice dress, did my makeup, and came downstairs at 6:15 ready to go. When I walked into the living room, the sight froze the blood in my veins. David, Eleanor, and Lily were already dressed, but they weren't getting ready to leave. They were sitting around the coffee table, which was covered in takeout boxes from a cheap Chinese restaurant. Eleanor was holding a paper plate with a half-eaten egg roll, looking up at David with tears streaming down her face. David looked absolutely furious. What is going on? I asked, my voice trembling. We have a reservation in 15 minutes. David stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Are you seriously asking that, Maya? Are you seriously going to pretend you didn't know? Know what? I asked, looking between him and Eleanor. Eleanor covered her face with her hands, sobbing openly now. David, please don't. It's my fault. I shouldn't have expected her to care. It's just a birthday. Stop protecting her, Mom, David snapped. He turned his gaze back to me, his eyes filled with pure disgust. Eleanor told me 2 days ago that you called her into your office. You told her that you couldn't afford the restaurant you booked, that your freelance business was failing, and that she was a financial burden on this family. You told her we were doing takeout instead and that she shouldn't mention it to me because it would embarrass you. The room felt like it was spinning. The air left my lungs. I looked at Eleanor, who was peeking through her fingers, watching my reaction with a look of absolute, terrifying satisfaction. It was a look of pure victory. I never said that, I whispered, my voice choking up. David, I swear to God, I never said that. I have the reservation confirmation right here on my phone. Why would I book it if I couldn't afford it? She's lying to you, David. She's making it all up. Enough, David shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Lily flinched and started crying. Do you think my mother would invent a story like that? She spent the last 2 days crying in her room because she thinks she's ruining our lives. She tried to refuse to eat tonight because she thought we didn't have the money. You've been cold to her, you've been passive-aggressive, but this is cruel, Maya. This is abusive. David, look at me, I screamed, tears finally spilling over my eyes. She is manipulating you, can't you see it? She's doing this on purpose to drive me away. Get out, David said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. I don't want Lily to hear you scream like this. Just get out and clear your head. We will talk about this tomorrow when you've calmed down and decided to tell the truth. I looked at my husband, the man who had promised to love and trust me forever, and I realized he was completely gone. He was entirely under her spell. I looked at Eleanor. She was comforting Lily now, wrapping her arms around my daughter, giving me a soft, sad shake of her head as if to say, look what you've done to your family. I didn't say another word. I grabbed my purse and my coat, walked out into the pouring rain, and got into my car. And that is how I ended up parked 2 blocks away, staring into the darkness, realizing that my life was being stolen from me by a woman who used kindness as a weapon. I sat there for an hour, the heat from the engine slowly fading, leaving the car cold and damp. I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I went back into that house tonight and tried to argue, I would lose. If I tried to convince David with words, he wouldn't believe me. Eleanor was a master of psychological manipulation. She had decades of experience, and I was just an amateur trying to play fair in a game where the rules didn't exist. I needed proof. I needed undeniable, objective reality. I took a deep breath, wiped my face, and started the car. I didn't drive home. Instead, I drove to an all-night electronics store about 20 minutes away. I walked in, my eyes red and swollen, and bought 3 small wireless nanny cameras, the kind that look like ordinary USB chargers or tiny electronic gadgets. They were motion-activated and streamed directly to an app on my phone. When I finally returned home, it was past 11 o'clock. The house was dark and silent. David was sleeping on the couch in the living room, a blanket pulled up to his chin. It broke my heart to see him there, but it also fueled my resolve. I crept through the dark house like a thief. I placed one camera on the kitchen bookshelf, hidden behind a stack of cookbooks, angled perfectly toward the kitchen island and the stove. I placed the second one in the dining room, hidden inside a fake potted plant. The third one went into the hallway right outside Eleanor's guest suite. When I finished, I went upstairs to our bedroom, lay down on the edge of the mattress, and didn't sleep a single wink. The next morning was brutal. David wouldn't look at me. He left for work early, only saying, "We'll talk tonight, Maya. I need space right now." Lily was quiet and distant, clinging to Eleanor's side before she left for school. Eleanor herself acted like a saint who had just forgiven her executioner. She made me coffee, poured it with a gentle, trembling hand, and whispered, "I don't hold any grudges, Maya. Family is family." I didn't reply. I just took my coffee, went up to my office, and locked the door. I opened the app on my phone and kept the live feeds running on a separate monitor next to my work computer. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Eleanor cleaned the living room, washed the breakfast dishes, and read a book. She looked like a sweet, lonely, elderly woman. I began to feel that familiar, suffocating self-doubt creeping back in. Was I crazy? Was I violating her privacy because of my own paranoia? Then around 2:00 p.m., the kitchen camera picked up movement. Eleanor walked into the kitchen. She wasn't limping. Her posture was straight, her movements quick, sharp, and energetic. She looked around the empty room, her face completely blank, devoid of that sweet, grandmotherly warmth. She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a fresh pitcher of orange juice that I had squeezed that morning for Lily. She carried the pitcher over to the kitchen island. Then she walked over to the cleaning supply closet, pulled out a bottle of liquid dish soap, and brought it back to the island. My heart stopped beating. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath catching in my throat. Eleanor unscrewed the cap of the dish soap. She held it over the orange juice pitcher and squeezed a generous amount of the thick, blue soap directly into the juice. She grabbed a long spoon, stirred it thoroughly until the soap dissolved completely into the pulp, and then held the pitcher up to the light to make sure it looked normal. I sat there paralyzed, watching her on the screen. She wasn't trying to poison anyone dangerously. It was just enough soap to make someone violently sick to their stomach. She put the soap back in the closet, returned the pitcher to the fridge, and then walked over to the kitchen phone. She dialed a number. I couldn't hear the audio perfectly through the camera, but I could hear her voice. It was loud, clear, and perfectly steady. She was calling David. David, honey, she said, her voice suddenly shifting into a fragile, panicked sob. It was an instantaneous transformation that sent chills down my spine. David, can you please come home early? I'm so scared. She's acting so strange. I went into the kitchen to make some tea and I saw her pouring something into the orange juice pitcher. She looked so angry, David. When she saw me, she slammed the fridge door and ran upstairs. I'm afraid she's trying to hurt us, honey. I'm afraid she's losing her mind because of the stress. Please come home. She hung up the phone. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, adjusted her apron, and then with agonizing deliberation, she threw herself onto the hardwood floor. She let out a sharp cry, grabbing her knee, and began to wail, waiting for my husband to arrive. I didn't cry, I didn't panic. A strange, icy calm washed over me. The fog had completely lifted. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was living with a sociopath. I downloaded the video clip directly to my phone. I made 3 copies of it, one to my cloud storage, one to my personal email, and one to an external flash drive. Then I walked downstairs. When Eleanor heard my footsteps on the stairs, her wailing grew louder. "Oh, my leg, please, someone help me," she cried, rocking back and forth on the floor. I walked into the kitchen, stood over her, and looked down at her. I didn't offer to help her up. I didn't ask what happened. I just stood there, holding my phone in my hand, watching her performance. Eleanor looked up at me, her eyes filled with manufactured terror. "Maya, please, I tripped. I think my leg is broken. Please don't hurt me." "The performance is over, Eleanor," I said, my voice deadpan and cold. She blinked, momentarily caught off guard by my lack of emotion, but she quickly recovered, sobbing louder. "What do you mean? I'm in pain. David is on his way. He'll help me." "I know he's on his way," I said. "You called him. You told him I put something in the orange juice." Eleanor's face hardened slightly, a glimmer of malice appearing in her eyes. "Because you did, David will find out what you are, Maya. He will protect this family from you." I pulled out the kitchen stool, sat down, and turned my phone screen toward her. I pressed play. The video started rolling. There she was, standing tall, without a limp, pouring dish soap into the juice pitcher, stirring it, and then making the phone call. The silence that fell over that kitchen was absolute. The fake pain vanished from Eleanor's face in an instant. Her eyes locked onto the screen, and for the first time since she had moved into our house, she looked genuinely terrified. Her skin turned a sickly, pale gray. She scrambled up from the floor with perfect agility, no limp, no arthritis, no frailty. "Where did you get that?" she hissed, her voice dropping into a raspy, venomous tone I had never heard before. "It doesn't matter where I got it," I said, my voice incredibly calm. "What matters is what happens next. David will be here in about 10 minutes. When he walks through that door, we are all going to sit down and we are going to watch this video together." I downloaded the video clip directly to my phone. I made 3 copies of it, one to my cloud storage, one to my personal email, and one to an external flash drive. Then I walked downstairs. When Eleanor heard my footsteps on the stairs, her wailing grew louder. "Oh, my leg, please, someone help me," she cried, rocking back and forth on the floor. I walked into the kitchen, stood over her, and looked down at her. I didn't offer to help her up. I didn't ask what happened. I just stood there, holding my phone in my hand, watching her performance. Eleanor looked up at me, her eyes filled with manufactured terror. "Maya, please, I tripped. I think my leg is broken. Please don't hurt me." "The performance is over, Eleanor," I said, my voice deadpan and cold. She blinked, momentarily caught off guard by my lack of emotion, but she quickly recovered, sobbing louder. "What do you mean? I'm in pain. David is on his way. He'll help me." "I know he's on his way," I said. "You called him. You told him I put something in the orange juice." Eleanor's face hardened slightly, a glimmer of malice appearing in her eyes. "Because you did, David will find out what you are, Maya. He will protect this family from you." I pulled out the kitchen stool, sat down, and turned my phone screen toward her. I pressed play. The video started rolling. There she was, standing tall, without a limp, pouring dish soap into the juice pitcher, stirring it, and then making the phone call. The silence that fell over that kitchen was absolute. The fake pain vanished from Eleanor's face in an instant. Her eyes locked onto the screen, and for the first time since she had moved into our house, she looked genuinely terrified. Her skin turned a sickly, pale gray. She scrambled up from the floor with perfect agility, no limp, no arthritis, no frailty. "Where did you get that?" she hissed, her voice dropping into a raspy, venomous tone I had never heard before. "It doesn't matter where I got it," I said, my voice incredibly calm. "What matters is what happens next. David will be here in about 10 minutes. When he walks through that door, we are all going to sit down and we are going to watch this video together." Eleanor took a step toward me, her hands clenching into fists. "He won't believe you. I'll tell him you forged it. I'll tell him you used AI, that you edited it to ruin me." Let him try to believe that, I said, looking her dead in the eye. Let's see if he believes a digital, time-stamped video file over a woman who just stood up off the floor after pretending her leg was broken. And if he doesn't believe it, the police certainly will. Pouring chemicals into a child's beverage is a felony, Eleanor. I will have you arrested before the sun goes down. She stared at me, her chest heaving. The mask had completely shattered, and underneath it was nothing but a desperate, cornered bully. She realized she had lost. She had overplayed her hand, and her perfect, carefully constructed empire of lies was crumbling to dust. What do you want? She spat out, the venom practically dripping from her words. Go to your room, I said. Pack your bags, every single one of them. You have 10 minutes before David gets here. If you're still in this house when he arrives, I show him the video. If you leave quietly, I will let you preserve whatever dignity you have left in his eyes. You will tell him that you've decided to move into an assisted living community or back to your hometown because you realize we need our space as a young family. You will leave and you will never, ever come back here. Eleanor glared at me with a hatred so intense it felt physical, but she knew she had no cards left to play. Without a word, she turned on her heel and marched down the hallway to her room. I heard the frantic sound of drawers opening and closing, the heavy thud of suitcases being dragged across the floor. 10 minutes later, the front door burst open. David rushed in, breathless, his face pale with worry. Mom, Eleanor, Maya, where is she? He stopped when he saw me sitting quietly at the kitchen island, sipping a fresh cup of tea. The orange juice pitcher was sitting in the sink, washed and completely empty. Where is she, Maya? What did you do? David demanded, running toward the hallway. Before he could reach the guest suite, Eleanor emerged. She was carrying 2 large suitcases. She looked tired, defeated, but she had her mask back on, or at least a version of it. She looked at David with a sad, weary smile. Mom, what's going on? What are you doing with your bags? David asked, completely bewildered. Eleanor looked at me for a split second, a flash of pure fear crossing her eyes before she looked back at her son. David, honey, I need to leave, she said, her voice shaking naturally this time. I lied to you on the phone. Maya didn't put anything in the juice. I had a moment of confusion. I've been feeling so overwhelmed lately, missing your father. I realized today that I am taking up too much space here. I'm causing problems between you and your beautiful wife. I called a friend in my old neighborhood and I'm going to go stay with her. It's for the best. David stood there, his mouth open, looking between his mother and me as if he had just walked into a parallel universe. Mom, what are you talking about? You said Maya was hurting you, you said. I was confused, David. Eleanor snapped, a hint of her real frustration slipping through. Please, just let it go, help me with my bags. David looked at me, his eyes begging for an explanation, for some kind of logic to make sense of the madness. I just sat there, keeping my promise. I didn't say a word. I let her leave with her dignity because keeping my family intact was far more important than a public execution. David helped her load her bags into an Uber she had called. He stood on the driveway for a long time, watching the car disappear down the street into the gray afternoon. When he came back inside, the silence in the house was heavy, but it was no longer suffocating. It was a clean, empty silence. David walked into the kitchen, dropped his head into his hands, and began to cry. I don't understand, he sobbed. I don't understand what just happened. She looked so crazy, Maya. She looked like a completely different person. I walked over to him, pulled his head against my chest, and held him tight. I know, honey, I whispered, kissing the top of his head. I know, but it's over now. We're going to be okay. Later that night, after Lily was fast asleep, I sat down with David and showed him the video. I had to. He needed to know the truth so that she could never worm her way back into our lives. It was excruciating for him to watch. He cried, he yelled, he went through the stages of grief right there at the kitchen table, realizing that the mother he adored was capable of something so deeply malicious. It took months of therapy, months of long, painful late-night conversations for us to heal. Trust is a fragile thing. Once it's cracked, it takes a long time to glue the pieces back together. But we did it. David and I became a team again, stronger this time because we had survived a storm that almost tore us apart from the inside out. Eleanor never came back. She moved into a small apartment 3 states away near her sister. We don't call her and she doesn't call us. Sometimes on holidays, she sends Lily a generic card with a $20 bill inside, but that's the extent of our contact. Looking back on that year, I learned a lesson that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. True evil rarely comes dressed in a villain-esque cloak, looking menacing and sinister. Most of the time, it comes disguised as absolute perfection. It comes with a warm smile, an organized pantry, and a plate of fresh cinnamon rolls, waiting for you to let your guard down so it can quietly tear your life apart. Trust your gut. If something feels too good to be true, or if someone's perfection makes you feel like you're losing your mind, don't question your sanity. Look closer. Because sometimes the people who claim to be fixing your life are the ones who are secretly breaking it.
If you made it this far, you already know this story was something else. If you enjoy real stories like this, don't forget to like the video. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let me know in the comments what you think about this situation and what you would do. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.